billionaire, a friend of a billionaire, or have investment to massive amounts of VC or a professional sports team, you are unlikely to turn your dream into a reality at this point in time. However, we can talk to these gentlemen who came in various stages of esports development. It is very interesting, I think, to hear their stories. So I'll begin by introducing them. You can probably tell by what they're wearing, which teams they came from, by the logos. So this is Jack Etienne. You can see by the cloud made of nines on his left breast that he is the CEO of C9. You can see Noah Winston here, who is wearing the helmet that he is part of the Los Angeles Valiant and CEO of the team Immortals. This gentleman here is the COO of the Mustangs, Colts, Broncos. Oh no, it's Liquid. No connection actually to the logo, but this is Mike Milanoff. And this is Arnold Herr, who is wearing nothing to represent his teams, but he does...
For a reason.
He does have one of the most boring names in esports, which is KSV, and the much more excitingly named Seoul Dynasty in the Overwatch League. So give it up for these guys who are here today to talk about ownership.
Arnold's suit and overall well-kempt demeanor represents the professionalism of Korean esports.
I see.
So I'm gunning for.
So let's start today by talking let's go in order of your entrance into the esports scene, because we came from sort of grassroots, which would have been Team Liquid, that started as a community site dedicated to StarCraft Brood War way back in the day, and then started to sponsor professional players, particularly in StarCraft 2, and was a community hub before Reddit came along, and then eventually joined Team Liquid. So you want to start talking about Team Liquid's beginnings a little bit and how the ownership group occurred?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. So 2001, one of the mantras of our org is always to identify the need in communities. And so in 2001, just like you said, Victor Goosens founded TeamLiquid.net, which started as a community site because he was looking for a place in the Western world where people could discuss StarCraft 2. It was really big in Korea, and there wasn't Reddit, there wasn't Twitter really yet even. So nobody was trolling Reddit, no one was trolling Twitter forums or Reddit forums, and so he made kind of this community site, and the forum community started growing. People started keeping up with the Korean esports scene and the streams and the results. And in 2007, we signed our first pro player onto a contract. One of the first pro players that we had was TLO, if we kind of stick to the StarCraft days, and he's still contracted to the organization today. So he's been under contract for 11 years, which is a pretty cool story. I'm still playing StarCraft 2. And, as things started growing and we started adding games, we eventually went through a merger. So the company was founded in Holland in 2001. And so in 2014, we ended up merging kind of with North American assets being Curse Esports. And Steve and Victor came together, decided to keep the Team Liquid banner going. And then we took on investment in 2015 and a bunch of success and winning later. Here we are.
Well, there you go. So the start of Team Liquid. So next, chronologically, we will go with Cloud9. Jack made probably one of the smartest investments in esports history by acquiring Quantic Gaming for the small price today of $10,000, which would be about 1/10 to 1/100th of what it might cost to buy out a professional player these days. Immediately entered the North American LCS and started seeing championship level success in his first season. So what drew you to esports initially, Jack? How did you get involved, and why did you decide to make a professional team?
When I co-founded Cloud9, $10,000, getting my wife to agree with actually spending $10,000 on a video game team was actually a remarkable feat. So I want you to recognize that.
and now she helps you run the team. Naturally.
But now she's my co-founder, and she helps me run the team. She quit her job, so it's actually a pretty good idea. But before Cloud9, I was working with TSM, and I was helping Reginald run TSM, and it was really a hobby for me. The TSM was really being financed by their websites, which were guides for people playing League of Legends, and I had so much fun just helping this team. It wasn't profitable at all. Go to different events around the world. That the esports bug hit me, and when I saw an opportunity to make my own team, I just jumped at it. What a lot of people don't know, that my first team that I actually bought was GGU, Good Game University, and I was the proud owner of a GGU LCS spot for maybe 3 weeks before I had the opportunity to buy High's team from Quantic, and I saw that, hey, this is actually a much better opportunity than GGU. No offense to those guys. And I'm glad I did. We saw immediate success, and from there, at the time, I was really concerned about the stability of the games I was involved in. I didn't know if League of Legends would stay as popular as it was. So the first thing I wanted to do was build stability for Cloud9, and I got into Counter-Strike, into Dota 2, and into Hearthstone.
Excellent, thank you. And so we will then, again, proceed chronologically to Noah Winston, who came into the world of esports with the help of some financial backing in late 2015 to create the brand Immortals. You purchased the slot into the LCS and then immediately started seeing a lot of success there. So what was your process? Starting as somebody outside of the scene wanting to get in, how did you acquire the capital in order to purchase this slot, which was then valued in the 7-figure range?
Sure. So just for a little context, when Team Liquid started in 2001, as Mike cited, I was 7 years old and barely knew what a computer was. So I entered esports at a very interesting and fortuitous time, because when I started Immortals in late 2015, I was entering esports as one of the kind of first wave of a new breed of organizations. This was at a time when esports was starting to get a lot more coverage and a lot more traction in mainstream media. The massive viewership numbers from 2013 and 2014 and 2015 worlds were starting to get more and more coverage. And that led to a lot of investors who had previously not really understood the space and not really been attracted by the space, starting to want to understand it better and starting to want to get to more exposure to it. From my... That's gone. Okay.
We can share.
So from my background, while I was at university, I had been using data and analytics to bet on sports and then eventually bet on esports, and I was pretty successful at that. And that kind of got me noticed and got me my first conversations with some people that were interested in providing financial support for a team. And the reason I say I got lucky is, when I dropped out of university to start an esports team, like 2 weeks later, Rick Fox started a team. And like 2 weeks after that, the co-owners of the Sacramento Kings started a team. And I think if I was out there as like a 20-year-old college kid trying to find investors, they would have compared me to Rick Fox and the Kings, and I probably wouldn't have compared too favorably. But because my timing was good, I managed to get away with that one. But the reason I entered the space was because I was first and foremost an esports fan. And as a fan that watched these games, I really wanted to try to prove that things could be done better from a brand perspective, that you could build an organization that had great players and had great talent and could win games, but also had an underlying identity or philosophy that drove what it did, and kind of provided a more tangible lifestyle or a more tangible philosophy for fans to be able to buy into. And there's certainly a hell of a lot more work to do on realizing that goal, but I'd like to think that we've made some progress along the way.
So the most recent ownership group to enter the esports on this panel is KSV, who was founded by Kevin Chu, who had made a significant sum of money developing mobile games and then selling to one of our sponsors today, Netmarble. And this is an organization that owns an LCK slot in Korea currently, as well as an Overwatch League slot as this Seoul Dynasty. So it is a brand that is run by Americans that is focused very heavily on Korean esports currently. So, Arnold, what was your job in terms of creating these KSV and Seoul Dynasty brands, and how did this entire organization spin up?
Yeah, so we're about 8 months now into this thing. We own teams across 5 different games. So, like you said, our League of Legends team actually is the Samsung Galaxy team that we acquired from last year. And then we have, of course, the Seoul Dynasty team and PUBG. We actually own 2 teams in PUBG, including one former Overwatch player playing in there. So, we are actually pretty new to this. But our advantage was really that we have kind of a great infrastructure within Korea already established. But what was lacking in the Korea infrastructure from our perspective was kind of this global viewpoint and kind of a really business-focused viewpoint. So a lot of these teams in Korea, what we noticed was that they were kind of marketing divisions of these gigantic conglomerates instead of really being focused on, man, we got to make this thing work. It was more, hey, don't lose too much money this year. So that's probably all our focus at this one, actually.
It's not much different from how we work now.
And I think I have a bit of a different background than these awesome gentlemen here. I came more from a traditional corporate background. So, finance, consulting, worked at Google. And my lifelong dream and passion was to own an esports team, but I saw the price of buying an esports team becoming higher and higher, whereas my salary wasn't quite keeping up. So, when I saw this opportunity to be part of this ownership group, and even if it meant that I was a small part, I had to jump at it. And so I joined kind of when this thing was getting to be started. And since then, we went from 1 team to 5. We'll have much more stuff revealed in the next few days about all the stuff that we're in. So we're super excited. And, my viewpoint is I can probably show the path to not hitting the lottery or not being a gambling phenom to come into esports.
So you are the chief growth officer, correct? What does your job on a day-to-day basis entail?
Basically, both the operation side on the team side, so working with the GMs and the coaches and the players on everything that they need to do, but also really on the marketing stuff, really growing the brand, really figuring out the brand and sponsorships as well. So really helping kind of oversee whatever it takes to grow the company.
So obviously, over the years that many of you have been involved, we've seen a dramatic change in terms of the amount of money, the amount of infrastructure in this industry. So there were a lot of lessons that many of you had to learn along the way from starting from, say, Team Liquid or Jack's perspective, where we didn't have coaches in esports and there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. Maybe players could have a team house. So there's been a lot of growing pains, a lot of lessons learned along the way. So I want to ask each of you, and we'll start down with Jack, From the beginning when you founded your team, because many of you came in not having ever run an esports team before and with little experience in the industry, what was the biggest lesson or biggest surprise lesson that you learned as an owner that you now consider ultra valuable to the way you run a team or your team's specific culture?
I think, this is probably going to seem like common sense to you guys, but teaching players how to be good teammates is, for me, a cornerstone of being a good Cloud9 player. And it's allowed me to have teams that are much more stable than a lot of my competitors. And when you have a stable roster, you're able to instill in them good training practices, but it really comes down to teaching players how to interact with each other and communicate effectively. And so a big part of what I do is when players come in, let them understand how they need to behave to be a good Cloud9 teammate. And that's been a big core of my success.
You guys can pick.
Yeah, I'll go next. Hello. For Team Liquid, one of our pillars is do what's right. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but ethically, in the fertility of the industry, you saw a lot of team owners when it came to player treatment or housing or contracts. Some people are on like 15-year contracts that they couldn't get out of, right? If you're a player, a lot of the players were not really sure what they were signing. And so I think the biggest lesson in building Team Liquid, let's say from the entrance of League of Legends or from like the VC era on, is do what's right. And even before that, and ethically, even if it's the more expensive move, or you have to keep a player around longer until you find a home for them, or even parting ways with staff, or even saying something simple like hey, we're not interested in employing you, or you didn't make the interview process. All of those experiences and interviewing with the org and working for the org, org or playing for the org or interacting with the org in any way, shape, or form, just do what's right is one of our major pillars. And we've seen a lot of success from that.
I don't know if it gets distilled down into such a nice catchphrase, but I'd say my biggest learning has kind of been. I was gonna do one and then Jack kind of stole it, so now I got to pick a different one. And no, it's fine. It's fine. I've learned a lesson from that too, Jack. Go first. Go first. Go first. Always go first. But I think the way that we think at Immortals and at LA Valiant around kind of brand and how to build a fan base, and definitely not something I came into the industry knowing or expecting, but something I learned along the way, was kind of the necessity of representing a particular lifestyle or set of decisions, not just through the set of decisions you make internally at your own organization, right? It's not just about how do you treat a player well, not just about how do you treat staff well, but how do you kind of create a set of norms that your fan community abides by too, right? How are you able to kind of turn a very decentralized fan base on Twitter or on Discord or on Reddit and kind of bind them around this set of community norms and beliefs and interests and philosophies, so that you're creating something that's much more cohesive. In esports, we don't get to have the New York Knicks, where you root for them just because you're born in New York, right? For a Cloud9 or a Team Liquid or an Immortals, you're looking at a global fan base. You're looking at people from every area of the world with different backgrounds and different ages and different passions and interests. And I think it's really hard to create a singular body of fans out of that decentralized fandom unless you can kind of really define your core values and the core values that everyone that supports you needs to have.
So I think I learned two things. One, just how important food is for players and coaches. I mean, that's
Especially
all
Korean-
they ever
especially
talk
Korean
about.
players.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what kind of kimchi. Is it aged enough? Is it not? I'm pretty particular about it as well. So luckily, really good kimchi available in LA. So no worries there. But I think the most important thing that I've learned, in these last 7 months, was really getting people bought in across the board on a mission, right? And I think it's the same thing that you see whenever you're forming a startup. Luckily, all of us kind of have startup experience, forming and running startups with different levels of success. And one of the things that we thought was really important is that, as kind of a longer term mission, we want to really be looked at as the gold standard in esports, but not in terms of kind of selling expensive or anything like that. But we always realize that each one of us, what's so great about Korean esports players and teams, and what we really want to push for, is try to continue to hold ourselves to higher and higher standards. So whether it's player conduct, whether it's training, whether it's performance, whether it's what kind of sponsors we work with, our goal is to keep pushing ourselves towards a higher standard. And what's been really helpful is getting a lot of the players and coaches and GMs, once they kind of know like the reason why you're doing the stuff that you do and why you choose certain sponsors or why you choose certain chefs or food, they start buying into something that's a little bit bigger than just their immediate, day to day. And that's kind of one of the biggest things I've learned, is that, the more time you spend kind of talking about what you're really trying to do long term in that vision, the more it pays off dividends later and later on, even though it seems like it may not be the most immediate thing.
Excellent. So moving on from the history of your teams and the lessons you've learned about ownership, let's talk about what it means to be an owner right now. Because I think regardless of when you guys came into the industry, I think we can all agree that we are at a particularly important inflection point in this industry right now. We're entering a new phase where many of the professional sports teams are starting to invest. We're finally starting to see franchises, which I think every owner will agree is a good thing. Yes. Fans have different opinions. I personally think it's a good thing, but we won't get into that because you'll just all agree with each other, so that's no fun. But now there is more and more investors coming in, more of a sort of broad media spotlight on the industry. And Esports, I think, to a lot of the people who have been in esports for a long time, one of the reasons that myself and other people like it is because it has a sense of authenticity. And that authenticity and the rawness and the direct access to the managers and professional players is something that I think the millennial generation and younger really values as part of interacting with their favorite pros and their favorite teams. However, as every single one of you knows, this can sometimes cause issues where players say or do things that, whether because of their cultural background or being idiots, can cause problems that for the teams or the sponsors. Where do you guys see this going? Like, where do you draw the line? Because many people are concerned about the over-sanitization of esports, but what is the balance between sanitizing everything, removing access to the teams and the players, versus having players that go rogue and have to be cut in certain cases?
I mean, I think from my end, and I've certainly been on both sides of this coin, right, in terms of having some transparency come back to bite me, but also in terms of transparency helping to resolve some issues. Oh, don't even start, Jack. Don't even start. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world, right? I think that this authentic connection, this transparency that you get to have between the fan base and the players, or the fan base and the management, or the fan base and the organization, that's what makes esports different, right? That's what makes it a compelling offering compared to what's available on NBC Sports Network on any given day. And in fact, if you look at the practices of a lot of traditional sports teams, they're actually starting to more mimic what esports teams are doing. There are like GMs sitting down to give direct-to-camera interviews about why they picked a certain draft pick or why they made a certain trade, whereas before they would just let the fan base, get beside itself with worry and let it sort itself out. So I think there's no doubt that for a younger generation of fans, whether they're traditional sports or esports fans, they care a lot about having an understanding not just of what's going on, but of why certain decisions are made. And to be honest, from my side, I've never had a bad experience being forthright with an audience or with our fans about why we make certain decisions. There's controversy about the decision itself, but I think that a fan base always reacts much more negatively if they think you made a certain decision because you're a bad person or because you believe something different from them, as opposed to understanding that, we're all relatively good people. We're all trying to do what's best for our organizations and what's best for our fans. And sometimes that might lead to a difference of opinion about what that right thing is. But unless you give them the opportunity to see into that decision-making process, unless you give them that transparency, they're never going to be able to understand who a player is or who a manager is beyond what they can see on social media.
I think going on what Noah said before, I think, one, I completely agree about that, the authenticity is something that makes esports great, right? And one thing that we try to kind of capsize into one thing that we tell even sponsors or other brands is it's not about polish, it's about texture. And that's something that people get, right? That's what, everybody really actually wants. They don't want that super acted video or anything like that. They want to see what they're actually like, because this is a really interesting story by itself, right? It's a brand new industry. People are playing games for a living for the first time, making lots of money and doing really well. That's exciting already by itself. But I think one thing that will happen, and I think that's where teams like the Immortals and all these teams are doing great, is I think you'll start seeing teams establish positions, whether it's social issues, whether it's whatever it is. And so that there's two things that happen. One, fans can kind of self-select about what brands they want to align with, but also players can too, and coaches can too. So as these teams are able to create real, authentic brands, you'll kind of naturally see a natural filter happening, just the same way that, you'll be very different being a Redskins fan versus a Lakers fan, right? So I just think that's going to start evolving over time as these teams also establish what they say is their code of conduct and what's okay and what's not okay.
I think this particular discussion is really interesting because Cloud9 is known kind of as a meme team, and we often are really pushing ourselves right against a line where if we go a little bit further, we're going to actually have some really upset people. And so when I talk with my players and when we bring them on, we have this onboarding process and we sit them down and talk with them for a while about, what you can say, what you can't say, and where it's gone too far. And the general rule for us is you can say pretty much anything, but if anything you say insults a group of people, you've drawn the line. And you guys can kind of think of your own examples on that. I don't really want to go down to it and say, walk into something I shouldn't say. But the thing is, and we've, in Cloud9's history, we've only actually had one time where one player actually crossed that line and we had to immediately fire him. In general, most of our players are actually very aware of how far they can go. And, we've had sponsors have asked us to actually clean it up a little bit and maybe sanitize what we do. But if we did that, we wouldn't really be Cloud9 anymore. And so we've had to sacrifice some potential sponsors by not just sanitizing what Cloud9 is all about. So we let Sneaky be Sneaky. We let Mango be Mango. But as you guys laugh, people love it. And it's authentic. It's what Cloud9's about. So there is that balance that we constantly have to do. And the line is crossed once you've insulted a group of people.
There's a lot to that question, by the way. So
I know.
I'm gonna take kind of the best of all the answers and just go a different direction because I think a lot of good stuff has been covered. You started out asking what it means to be an owner as well, and then kind of went into players. And so for us, our focus right now in the current climate is number one, be a clean brand, be professional, and focus on infrastructure first and foremost, because in our experience, we take essentially revenues, invest them back into the organization, which then leads to a more global fan base and a more developed audience, a more educated audience. I think content is a great example. So we've invested a lot, I would say arguably more than all other teams in content creation with an internal production company that we have. And we find that those stories and creating those narratives and, showcasing our players and what they're really like, just like you said, Arnold, helps a lot with the fans and getting them connected. The second thing is, being buttoned up or professional to work with by brands. And so we focus on partner retention. In the current day and age, we see a lot of brands coming in, a lot of brands going out, a lot of brands working with a team for a year, then no longer working with the team. And so we'd like to be known as essentially easy to work with, professional to work with, and we have partners that are 6.5 years old now in Alienware or HyperX. I know Jack shares HyperX as well for 5 years now. That's really important in my opinion. And the third thing is innovation. So if you're not innovating on infrastructure, you have to be innovating elsewhere to stay ahead. Everyone here on this panel is innovating in some way with their org. And so I think that breeds better infrastructure, breeds better players because you're innovating on facilities or you're innovating on onboarding or a retirement program or, the way that you have a competitive advantage during the recruitment process because of, where you're based or how you treat players or what resources you provide. So I'd say those three core pillars for me, operationally as an owner, in the current climate. And I think, I'm not going to go into the player thing. Obviously, we have Breaking Point. I don't know if anyone's seen that. I think we all have to deal with players and setting a great example for them. And I think letting them be themselves is great, but also watching them grow up is awesome and watching them care a lot. For me, I love hearing questions about the business from a Golden Glue when he was still with us, or from a Double Lift, or where they're interested in hey, how is this sponsorship deal structured, or how did this deliverable, how did you come up with this deliverable with HyperX? I love questions from players when they're interested in the organization or in the business or asking financial questions, or I try to be as transparent as possible, and I think that's a great example to set for them and watching them grow up. And so there's a lot in that question. So those 3 or 4 things.
I try and give you some wiggle room.
Yeah. Thank you.
So one of the great differences in esports ownership, even though we have now reached the franchise level that is much different than a traditional sports team ownership, is if we take a traditional American sports model like the NFL or the NBA, the owners actually own the league itself. And there is no intellectual property nobody owns football or basketball, whereas the developers themselves are franchising, whether it's Riot or Blizzard with Overwatch, and they control the IP. And at the end of the day, you guys can't do anything without their say-so, and you have to play with them in a way. You can't just say, I'm not going to participate in the LCS or the Overwatch League. I'm going to go form my own league with blackjack and hookers, right? You can't do that. So in this world where you are constantly having to work with the developers, what is the one thing that hasn't been done yet, or the biggest thing that you want developers to do to help you guys as team owners? What would be the largest help? If you could change one thing between yourselves and the developer powers that be, what would it be?
I mean, like owning a bunch of Activision Blizzard stock would be nice. I mean, realistically, right, I think if you asked this question a year ago, you get a very different answer. If you asked this question a year ago or a year and a half ago, the answer is, look, these are great games. Riot Games with League of Legends, Valve with Counter-Strike, these are all amazing games that have huge fan bases. But it's really hard for all of us to invest in innovation and infrastructure and proper player treatment when we don't have the stability of being committed in like a committed relationship or a committed partnership with the publisher itself. And that development of the franchise system, both from Riot Games and from Activision Blizzard over the last year, has been an incredibly important development to the industry because it just fundamentally changes the dynamic. If you look at Overwatch League, of course, Activision Blizzard still owns the IP of Overwatch. But they've committed to the teams that there are these certain rights and certain sharing and certain cooperation that you get by being a part of that ecosystem. Because Blizzard understands, yes, they made a great game, but that game can't be successful by itself. It needs skilled and experienced team operators to help turn that game into a really popular and persistent league. And so I think that's one of the best examples of a really in-depth cooperation with the publisher, right? If you look at Activision Blizzard's Overwatch League, you have localized teams that are able to build fan bases in certain cities. You have in-game digital items. You have robust league merchandising. You have strong commercialization both at the league level and at the individual team level. And I think those are the types of partnerships that team owners have always looked for. I don't want to speak for KSV because they're newer to the space, but Team Liquid C9 and Immortals...
They haven't known the suffering.
But Team Liquid C9 and Immortals have always been incredibly aligned on understanding the value that we bring to esports titles and to esports publishers, and also understanding that it's really difficult for us to kind of exercise that value without having long-term partnership with those publishers, right? Just putting Team Liquid or Immortals or C9 in your esports league isn't going to make you incredibly popular overnight. It takes time. And if it takes time and if it takes investment, we all want to know that there's a light at the end of that tunnel, a kind of goal that we're all going towards together. And I think that's why the franchise system, and this is not answering your question at all, but this is why the franchise system has been so important. And, you know, I got to go first, so I didn't answer the question. I've learned my lesson today.
Thanks, Noah, for going first, by the way.
It was a great summary, though, of what he did want. So I guess he's just super happy. No complaints now.
Honestly, yeah. I'm good. I don't need anything else. More Overwatch leagues.
So a little about Team Liquid before I answer. So we currently are in 13 games. Overwatch League is not one of them, just for full transparency. So I'm not answering from like an Overwatch League perspective. However, I must say Overwatch League, from the outside looking in, you know, not from the inside looking out, as an owner, not having an OWL brand, I think is super successful. I think, to answer your question directly, I really like the almost risk that Blizzard took. And when I say risk, I don't mean it in a bad way. I feel like Blizzard just like, you know, made something happen and treaded on snow, you know, that was never stepped on before, and really just, you know, blindly had faith in the franchise model and in their city model and in the organizations that they wanted to work with, and how they were going to structure it and what time frame. And I love that. And so to answer your question, I love the League of Legends partnership with Riot Games. I think we're all so short on time a lot of the time that we, obviously as team owners, we want more meetings, we want, more updates, we want more creative marketing, we want, Riot to see it from our side as a team owner, and they want, us to see it from their side as a league operator and as the tournament organizer and as, the franchise or IP creator and holder. And so the only thing that I wish is that just as an industry that there's more attempts at franchising, whether it's a failure or not, I don't care. Like more failures is great. Whether we're part of those failures or not, maybe we evaluated that, we should do this franchise and it fails down the line. I think that's great for the industry. And so that's the only thing that I wish that doesn't exist right now. I wish there was more Blizzards that would just spring up a league, in a year of that size and scale, whether it fails or not.
Yeah, just for the record, I think this is a great opportunity to draw a contrast. Team Liquid in favor of failure, Immortals in favor of success.
Thank you, Noah, for that analysis. I'll make sure to get you back for this one. Thank you.
You're gonna be biding your time, waiting for that right comeback. So actually, one thing I can kind of reveal behind the curtain of KSV is, we were trying to look at esports for a while about like, how do we enter into the esports space? How do we find that right opportunity to enter? And luckily, our first team was the Overwatch League team, right? And that's because we saw a structure that had a chance at really changing the dynamics of esports to make it something that's kind of like, those Facebook relationships where it's complicated and you move to in a relationship. So that's what it was, right? Of course, you might even fight even more with the game publisher, but at least your incentives are aligned and that you're structured in a way that you guys really want this league to be successful, and you're going to wake up at 4 a.m. doing stuff, trying to get everything up and running because you want that league to succeed, and there's somebody on the side only thinking about the league and making sure that's successful. So, like you said, what I would love is more structures that offer possibilities to create those partnerships where the incentives are aligned, where somebody wakes up thinking about that league and making that league successful and thinking about some player issue here and some community issue here, but really just going all in on that. So I think those kind of structures are what we would want to see more, whether successful or failures, but, hopefully successful.
Success.
So...
It's hard for me to add on to what these guys said. I think basically we're saying we want to see more franchise structures.
But success or failure?
Failure is not an option for me. We need to have some more wins. Honestly, I think that publishers, if they learn from the success of LCS and Activision Blizzard, that if they move forward, we're ready to jump in on their projects. So, yeah. So.
Just to add something really quick. I think it also ties in nice. I'm not going to burn you right now, Noah. Don't worry. I think it ties in nicely also with the games that we operate in. So I think that, all of the healthy esports or sports ecosystems that exist out there in terms of franchising, like Clash Royale is a great example. I think are all four of us in Clash Royale, or only the three of us? Oh, you're announcing it soon, probably.
Saved.
I'm just gonna include him on this one. But for example, Clash Royale is going to be the third, charter-like ownership franchise that we'll participate in if you count Rainbow Six and LCS for Team Liquid. And that these ecosystems existing and these franchises existing and these publishers really taking the step forward and having these financial models and team relationships and getting in a relationship together available will determine also what games it makes sense for us to be in. So Jack and I can't be in many more games than we already are. I think we're both in like 14 titles or something like that, 13 or 14. It's obviously fluctuating every now and then, but yeah, I mean, we'd love to be in more as long as the franchises exist. And so I think that's an interesting discussion as well, as how the four of us enter games or leave games. And I think franchising is a huge part of that.
That's a good point. Like I am definitely now evaluating what games we're going to get involved in, and there's going to be decisions that are made based on the structures that are set up with the publishers if I'm going to be involved or not. We're definitely getting there.
Okay, I'll try and get one or two more questions in before we take questions from the audience. So I have ignored the supposed topic of this the entire time because, as I said when we started, unless you are currently an owner or are exceedingly wealthy or are connected to exceedingly wealthy people, you are probably not going to be able to afford the franchise buy-ins, which is seemingly the model of the future. But what we can do is, because we are at a college right now, and I think we can all agree that there is a dearth of competence in this industry, and there are many, 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 many needs to fill that are not ownership. Many people look at collegiate esports. It is definitively not at this time a path to being a professional gamer. Most of these owners all of you guys will agree, you want players who are generally younger. There's not really a point for them to go to collegiate esports at the current time until there is a deep infrastructure across the world that goes from high school, coaching in high school to coaching in college. And then maybe that's the point where we start taking players outside of college. But what can college students focus on right now? What are your biggest needs in your organizations as owners? And how can these college kids tailor their education to have a successful esports career?
Yeah, so I think, and I know that we all agree with this, so maybe you guys are going to have additional color to add, which is great. But if I see another resume that lists like loving esports as a primary qualification for an esports job, I'm done, guys.
Wow, it's that easy to get rid of you, huh?
Yeah, it really is. I think you can get rid of me pretty easy with that. But so from my perspective, like loving esports is great, right? Like I entered this space as an esports fan. All of us entered the space as esports fans. If we didn't love esports, we wouldn't be here. But if you're going to work in esports, you need to develop a incredibly specific and clear qualification or competency, right? If you want to be an esports videographer, like train on that and show me how you're the best at that. And you also happen to love esports and know who all my players are and know who my organization is, right? If you want to be social media or graphic design or marketing or putting on events, like become as good as you can at that thing and have that supplemented by loving esports. But if you come to me and say, I love esports, I'll do literally any job in your organization, that doesn't tell me what you're good at, and that doesn't tell me that you're actually qualified. I'm sure you'll work hard, and I'm sure you're going to work the hours, but that's not enough anymore, right? That was enough 5 years ago, maybe, but we're at a different stage in esports, right? When you're looking for a job in esports, you're not just competing with other college kids for that job. You're competing with some of the best from traditional sports and traditional entertainment, and finance and media. And if you want your skill set to shine there, having an authentic route or an authentic connection in esports is great. But you also need to be good at the job that you're applying for, and that's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, I think what is exciting is that the amount of opportunities, like of how you can interface with esports, is vastly grown because of the investment that we have now. So, all of us have, mental fitness training, sports psychologists, physical therapists, social media managers, community managers, just, team managers. Like, honestly, you name it, we got it. And so if there's like a passion you have for like any one of those specific things, show how it ties to esports and how you're really good at that specific thing. And then you're probably going to find a job in esports.
I think the only thing I have to add is kind of echoing both Noah and Jack and probably what you're going to say, is to kind of like sum it up into an easy thing. It's really two things. One, you got to build hard, legit skills, right? Whether it's programming, Excel, whatever it is, you have to have hard skills. Like if you don't have that, go get it now. And it takes one semester. In classes, you can just sit in on them. You have every ability right now to build a hard skill. So you need to get a hard skill, right? And two, if you say you have a soft skill, you have to prove that soft skill exists. So if you come in and say, hey, I can do social media because I like social media, I'm going to ask how many followers you have, right? Like it's so, though that's kind of a philosophy that I try to use is really when you're in college, you have every opportunity to build the hard skill. Please do so. And in terms of soft skills, go and prove that you are really good at this and build a portfolio. If you guys come with that and then you come in with any kind of passion, like you're immediately coming in for the interview direct with us. We're hiring, by the way.
Yeah, I think we're all hiring, and I think the organizations here, the job postings, the way we posted jobs and how often and what type of jobs in 2014 is vastly different than now, right? Like a lot of teams are creating business units with creative revenue sources, whether it's like internal agency capabilities or content production, like you mentioned, Noah, or representation or writing or there's so many creative fields, and honestly, I agree with you on the resume thing. The amount of resumes that we get, about, not exaggerating, like 100 to 115 to our support email per week. We're also a performance-focused organization, so when it comes to results, I know that a lot of the times you still can't show, career experience when you're in college, and you can't show like, hey, you can only show like a GPA, right? And you can say, I do these extracurriculars. For us, results matter in literally every business unit and every department. And so we're looking for constantly having a competitive advantage with the people that we bring in. So what is your competitive advantage? Like what are you going to interview like? What do you bring to the table? What can you show on paper? What projects have you worked on? Don't focus on, one game and, you love London Spitfire, so you want to work for Jack. Don't you love double lift, so you want to work at the Alienware training facility in Santa Monica for Team Liquid. Don't want to be in esports because you're a fan of a player. Show us that passion and show us that competitive advantage, and we leave job postings up even after it's filled because we want to get maybe another hire, or maybe we see a hire and we don't even have a department for that person yet, right? Like a lot of us are like maybe just now building sales departments. Like maybe we have 10 salespeople in 5 years. Who knows? Maybe we can find those people now. Maybe we can find interns, or maybe we can find an executive assistant that flourishes into a department head. The possibilities are endless, but what's your competitive advantage?
The one thing I'd just add there, because Mike said something that like most of our job postings are like pretty fake. Like we just kind of keep those up there, right? Like they're great, right?
I don't even have to burn you anymore. You just did yourself.
It's fine. Like most of our job postings are up there because they're up there, and it's great to source open applications. But the vast majority of the people that we hire are not coming through an open application process for a very specific job posting. A lot of the time, it's someone emailing us saying, here's this set of hard and soft skills I have, and here's a job that I want to do at your organization. And it might not be an open job posting that we have, but like the way that we all got here was we invented our own jobs, right? Nobody was hiring for CEO of Cloud9 when Jack started Cloud9. Maybe people were hiring for COO of Team Liquid when Mike got hired, but I can't vouch for that. No. We just kind of...
You can vouch for that, actually, because I interviewed for COO of Immortals, but also I didn't join Team Liquid as COO. I joined as Director of Operations and then eventually got promoted, so I think there's a lesson there as well. But anyway, Continue your point.
Sure. So yeah, like everyone... I mean, even before Mike was Director of Operations, even at Team Liquid, his other experience in the industry like came from him taking an opportunity and making the most of it, right? So I don't want you to feel like, oh, you're advertising for a social media coordinator on your website. I should go study social media so that I can go work for you. I mean, that's great, but honestly, I want you to do the thing that you're passionate about. And this kind of calls back to what Jack was saying, right? Like if you love fitness and nutrition, awesome. Like esports needs physical trainers and nutritionists, right? If you love like psychology or chemistry, right? Like there's tons of applications of hard sciences in esports performance science. So like do the thing that you love and are really good at, and then figure out the esports piece of it, whether or not we happen to have like an open job posting for that on any of our websites.
Not to make this Noah and I talking back and forth. By the way, love Noah. We're just kidding around with each other. But to build on his point, there wasn't a director of operations position at Team Liquid when I got that, right? I just interviewed, and then Steve and I sat down, and he was like, okay, so what do you want to do? I obviously want to hire you. And then we kind of just built the JD together. The other thing I'll say, so one phrase that I said is, what's your competitive advantage? The second thing I'm going to say, which is kind of what I live by, is put yourself in positions where you're saying yes to things that you don't know how to do constantly. That's where I got to COO of Team Liquid. I'm literally saying like, yes, this sounds like fun. I'll work on it. I'll figure it out. Even though I don't have a college degree for it or training for it or career experience for it. So my second piece of advice on the college level is do what you don't know how to do.
Yeah, and it's okay to say, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out. And like, a lot of us we love that. Yeah. We love that. Like, you take it upon yourself to figure out how to make things work.
I don't want to make it a career training fair, but you also got 4 guys here, probably 5 with Monty, that are looking for help. Go and talk to us. Go give us your email, ask questions. Even if you don't respond, it's not going to hurt your feelings, or it's not going to hurt our feelings, right? So go network and go ask people for emails and ask questions.
Yeah, and to expand upon that, the lifeblood of the esports industry has always been the transparency and the openness, and events like this. I started working in esports as a community journalist, and I met people going to events in 2004, and I'm still here and somehow employed today, although people have tried to stop me from being employed.
Just one word of warning: you need to go edit your resumes now, because if you hand it to me and it says "I love esports" at the top, I'm not going to get you back.
Or he'll actually just step down to CEO. So there might be a job opening, actually. He started at CEO as college age, so I believe you can too. But anyway, so let's take some questions from the audience. I guess I'll run around and do that.
All right, my question's for Noah Winston. For someone who was so successful for his age, what would you say was your one core value that separated you not necessarily from your esports peers, but from your college peers and got you to where you are today?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. I wish I knew the answer to it. I think from my perspective, I think from my perspective, the experience that was most relevant that led to me getting opportunities in esports had very little to do with my college education. I was studying political science in college, and that, didn't cross-apply all that well. The stuff that had the most experience was right out of high school. I simultaneous to being in college, started a small business. I used data and analytics to get a better understanding of a space that I was really passionate about. I'm just the kind of person that doesn't go shallow into things, right? If I love something, I'm going to dig deep and really try to understand it, both from a quantitative and a qualitative perspective. And it's that kind of intellectual curiosity almost, right? Like a desire to understand how things work and understand how things can be done better, and a refusal to accept existing orthodoxy as just the way things should be. That's what you're gonna need.
I was just gonna say he's fearless and curious, man. Like when I first met this kid, I was like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" Because I would say something like, "No, I think you're wrong, Jack." Like, what? Who?
I was there for 2 days, and Jack's been there for 4 years, and I'm like, Jack doesn't know what he's talking about.
But I loved it. The guy made me laugh, and he was, and he was always, willing to duke it out verbally. Because I would kick his ass, but no, but no, that fearless curiosity, I think, really did well for you.
All right, we can take a couple more questions from people. Let's go back. You used to work for Immortals. Get out of here. Oh, you still work for Immortals. Sorry.
So this question is directed at Arnold, but I would also appreciate other answers. So you mentioned that you're hiring and you're looking for hard skills. Which hard skill, if you had to pick one, are you looking for?
I mean, so I think across the board, we're looking for hiring across the divisions, right? So whether it's finance, programming, whether it's social media, video editing, content, all that stuff, we're looking for that. But what we're really looking for is that proof that you know how to use it, that you have a portfolio, and that you're executing on it. So, that's what I mean. It doesn't even have to be that you're a major, as long as you know how to do it. Right? I've seen comp sci majors that can't program. I've seen finance majors that don't know shortcut keys on Excel, right? So for us, it's about that they come in with skills, can prove it, and that they're excited to show it and show off something that they worked hard on.
So three of you, minus KSV, have all been involved in relatively unstable esports, I would say, with obviously Smash and having the best Dota 2 team in the world and being involved in Counter-Strike as well. How do you guys evaluate getting into these more unstable esports with like much less structure and developer support for that? Like what's like the risk analysis that you guys kind of go through for that?
I mean, what I do, I usually only get involved in games if the community is loving that game. If I'm seeing it show up on Twitch, if there's a lot of people going to events and applauding that specific event, that's when I start really piquing my interest. Because if no one's watching the game, if it's not a good spectator experience, there's no point in Cloud9 being involved.
I'm going to go with the guy wearing the CJ. Oh, it's not CJ. I was wrong. It's accelerated science.
Oh yeah. So yeah, on the accelerated science front, I've been getting very interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I know, Noah, you mentioned that you got into esports through data and analytics, and I wanted to know, how do you guys see the role of like data or big data or AI or any of those other like buzzwords in the upcoming days of esports' development?
Yeah, I can take this one. We just actually announced a partnership with SAP around the artificial intelligence and scrimming methodologies that we use, and kind of those data sets that are not really available in the public domain, really. Like, how does a League of Legends team practice, or what do they talk about, or what things do they do from a repetitive standpoint, or how does karaoke lead post-game discussion? Can you teach that to a program, or can you teach that to a piece of software to make an individual better, or a team better, or to help with the progression that Monty mentioned earlier, which is, from pre-high school to, middle school to high school to college, and to kind of up the level of skill of the average video game player, and the journey towards an esports team. So I think with the International in 2017, you also saw the AI project there, which is, that's probably, you're nodding your head. Okay, great. So that, I think that is the beginning of something where even pro players in the future will be able to find a practice partner that's better than them consistently. And, I think even Arteezy in one of the interviews for that in particular was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Or I saw it, moving up 2 steps when this thing was at this much HP. And so, yeah, I think it's super interesting. And we're constantly looking for partners who want to innovate on data sets, or training methodologies, or practice regimes, or even cognitive function with our partner in Tobii eye tracking through Alienware. We're constantly analyzing all of that, because I think in the future it'll give us a competitive advantage to other orgs.
Hi, Azento from the shotcaller.net. I was wondering, besides Mike from Team Liquid, do you other owners feel a disadvantage from different orgs such as Team Liquid or TSM or CLG because these orgs are owned by former pro players?
Do you mean as their esports management?
As an owner.
But you mean like Steve and Reggie are pro players? I think that comes with positive and negative consequences, right? Like Jack spent a good year or so working with Andy, and I'm sure like Andy 3 years. Wow, you're still standing. Wow. Look, like as with everything, like life experience leads to a lot of things. Like easy example, let's use Andy from TSM, right? Like Andy from TSM, through his time as a pro player, probably became like one of the best leaders that came up in a grassroots way in esports, right? Like Andy learned all of his leadership skills from his experience being a pro player and interacting in a competitive environment. And if he wasn't the CEO of TSM, he'd probably be like the best League of Legends head coach, maybe in the world, maybe just in North America. Not for me to say. that also comes with some downsides, right? Like Andy spent a lot of his time in his younger years, like focusing on how do I play League of Legends better, and that doesn't necessarily afford the time for like how do I like Mike get a good understanding of the way that a P&L functions, or how do I like Jack really understand like a professional sales cycle from a sponsor. Right. And that's something that you have to learn. And it's the same thing that I had to learn. Right. Like I came into esports with a certain set of skills, none of which involved operating in a competitive environment. And so when I entered, I had to look towards the guys like Jack and Andy and Steve that had that more kind of competitive team experience to shore up my weaknesses. I feel like that was kind of a non-answer, but like obviously everyone has individual strengths and individual weaknesses.
I want to compliment Jack really quick. So Jack is actually super bad at League of Legends, okay? and there's a compliment in here. But Jack on a global stage is one of the best owners that exists today, in my opinion. When it comes to scouting players and understanding how teams mesh and what rosters to put together, and he was never a pro player, right? I think if you're a pro player and you're running a singular game org, like let's say you are just a League of Legends org, and that's all you'll do for the rest of your life, and you don't want to be a global brand, I think, sure, maybe you have some advantages with, how does a 17-year-old think? What do they get emotional about? What are they raging about in their head during team discussion, or how to have them get something and how to have something stick. But I think when it comes to like a global stage, and Cloud9 being a global brand, Team Liquid being a global brand, there's still the 13 other games that you weren't a pro player in, right? And so, pro players sometimes act the same in these different games, and sometimes they're the same age or the same age range. But yeah, I mean, props to Jack for consistently putting together super good rosters in literally 10 games all at once. And he was never a pro player. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Yes, I'm silver in League of Legends. Sorry.
All right, so I'm sure these gentlemen will make themselves available to you should you have any follow-up questions after this, but I've been told we have to stop, unfortunately. So please give a round of applause to these guys for coming up here.